In the final winter of the war, East Prussia lay buried under snow and silence. The villages that had once echoed with the sounds of harvest and laughter now lay in ruins, smoke curling up from what was left of roofs and barns. On the horizon, the low growl of engines rolled closer every day. Soviet tanks advancing westward with unstoppable force. It was early 1945, and for the German forces scattered across the Eastern Front, the war had turned into a long retreat. Entire divisions were collapsing, cities were burning, and the Luftwaffe, once the terror of Europe's skies, had all but vanished. Airfields lay abandoned, fuel was gone. Orders were chaos, yet amid that chaos, one plane, unauthorized, unrecorded, and flown by a pilot acting entirely alone, would take to the sky for one final mission of revenge. The plane was a Focke-Wulf 190, a machine that should not have existed anymore. Most had been destroyed or grounded for lack of spare parts. But somewhere near Königsberg, a small team of mechanics had worked in secret. They scavenged wreckage from other aircraft, a wing from one, an engine cowling from another, even landing gear taken from a crashed Messerschmitt. Piece by piece, they assembled a working plane in a half-collapsed hangar, their breath freezing in the air as they worked under the weak light of a single oil lamp. There were no orders, no officers overseeing the job. The man who would fly it, a veteran Luftwaffe pilot named Hans Schulze, had seen his squadron wiped out weeks earlier. He had lost everything. The plane was his only means of fighting back. By January, the Soviets had crossed the Vistula and were driving hard toward Berlin. The Red Army's tanks advanced through East Prussia like an unstoppable tide, their artillery leaving nothing standing in its path. The German High Command ordered evacuations and withdrawals, but Schulze refused to retreat. In his mind, the war wasn't over until he said it was. He fueled the patched-up Focke-Wulf with whatever aviation gas remained in the depot. Barely enough for one mission. His ammunition was scavenged too. Half-empty belts of 20mm rounds, a few rockets, and two 250-kilogram bombs loaded by hand. At dawn, with the airfield shrouded in mist, he started the engine. The noise shattered the stillness of the morning, a low, uneven roar as the old BMW radial coughed and sputtered to life. Mechanics and soldiers turned to look, some shouting for him to stop, but Schulze didn't hear them. He was already rolling down the frozen strip, ice cracking beneath the wheels. The Focke-Wulf lifted off into the pale sky, climbing slowly through drifting smoke and cloud. No authorization, no mission plan, just one man and a machine built out of fragments. Later reports from Soviet ground units described what happened next. Around midday north of Allenstein, Red Army convoys came under sudden attack from a lone German fighter. It came in low, skimming treetops and ridgelines, striking with terrifying precision. Bursts of cannon fire tore into columns of trucks and tanks. Soldiers scrambled for cover, unsure where the attack was coming from. The fighter dove, vanished into the clouds, then came back again from another direction. Some thought there must be a whole squadron hidden above the overcast, but it was only one aircraft. One man. For nearly 2 hours, the lone FW-190 harassed the Soviet armored spearhead, destroying several vehicles and halting the advance temporarily. Its movements were erratic, almost reckless, yet devastatingly effective. Even Soviet anti-air batteries couldn't pin it down. Witnesses said it seemed to appear and disappear with the snow itself. By late afternoon, the attacks stopped as suddenly as they began. When the smoke cleared, the road was littered with burning wreckage, tanks, trucks, and men. The Red Army assumed it was a coordinated Luftwaffe counterattack. It wasn't. The fighter never returned to base. For days, no one knew who had flown it. The Luftwaffe command at Rastenburg issued no records of a mission in the area. No pilot reported missing. Then a week later, villagers found wreckage in a snow-covered field near the frozen river Alle. The aircraft had crash-landed hard and burned. The pilot was still strapped inside. The plane bore no serial number, no squadron insignia, just a hand-painted word near the nose. Reich. Revenge. When German ordnance officers inspected the wreck, they found that the aircraft had been built almost entirely from mismatched parts, a Frankenstein creation of different models. It wasn't supposed to fly at all, yet it had not only flown, it had fought with lethal precision. They never found Schulze's personal records. His name appeared nowhere in Luftwaffe dispatches after late 1944. It was as if he had vanished from the war and then reappeared only to write his own ending. In the chaos of Germany's collapse, his story spread quietly through the remnants of the Luftwaffe. Ground crews whispered of a rogue pilot who had defied orders and taken off alone to strike back against the invaders. To some, it was an act of madness. To others, defiance. Officially, the event was classified as unauthorized flight activity. Unofficially, it became legend, the story of the illegal plane that took revenge alone. As the Reich crumbled, there were other stories like it. Desperate men making impossible choices, tank crews fighting until their guns melted, submarine captains refusing to surface, infantry officers leading charges against tanks with Panzerfausts in both hands. They weren't acts of strategy. They were acts of emotion, of memory, of personal retribution against a world that had already been lost. Schulze's flight was one of the last symbolic gestures of a dying Air Force. A reminder that even when orders failed and hope was gone, some men still took to the skies, not for victory but for vengeance, for honor, or simply because it was all they had left. No one ever claimed credit for the attack north of Allenstein. No unit marked it on their combat records. The Soviets never identified the pilot. Yet the photographs taken after the battle, grainy, overexposed images showing burned tanks and cratered roads, proved that something extraordinary had happened. A single plane had halted an entire column, even if only for an afternoon. And in that moment, amid the snow and smoke of East Prussia, the myth of the lone avenger was born. In the years that followed, as historians sifted through the wreckage of the war, they found scattered notes about a Black Cross fighter that appeared without warning during the last battles on the Eastern Front. Some dismissed it as rumor, a misinterpretation of chaotic combat reports. Others believed it was real, one of the countless fragments of truth buried beneath the fog of war. What remains undeniable is this: in a war defined by machines and commands, sometimes a single human act, unauthorized, irrational, but fiercely personal, could still leave its mark. The illegal plane that took revenge alone wasn't just a legend about a pilot and a machine. It was a symbol of the human heart inside the wreckage of total war, the refusal to surrender, even when defeat was absolute. By late 1944, the Luftwaffe was dying. What had once been the most feared air force in the world was now bleeding out under relentless Allied and Soviet pressure. The skies that had once belonged to the Germans were ruled by others, by the swarms of P-51 Mustangs in the west and Yak-9s and La-5s in the east. The Reich's airfields were in ruins, its fuel reserves nearly gone, and its once great squadrons reduced to scattered remnants. The Allied bombing campaign had been devastatingly effective. Entire aircraft plants in Regensburg, Wiener Neustadt, and Marienburg were turned to twisted metal. Each new pilot who took to the air knew he was stepping into a losing fight. By that autumn, a German pilot's average life expectancy in combat was less than 3 missions. Amid this chaos, the Luftwaffe High Command tried to hold things together with desperate measures. Jet aircraft projects like the Messerschmitt Me-262 were being rushed into service, but supply shortages and Hitler's erratic orders crippled them. Older aircraft were stripped for parts, and maintenance crews were forced to improvise with whatever they could find. One of those mechanics, stationed at an airfield near Königsberg, was said to have watched his entire squadron wiped out by Soviet Il-2 Sturmovik ground attack planes. His name, according to scattered accounts, was Unteroffizier Erich Schulze, though no official record has ever fully confirmed it. His Focke-Wulf 190, once the pride of the Luftwaffe's front line, had been written off after a hard crash landing. Schulze, however, refused to let it die. When orders came to retreat west and abandon the damaged aircraft, he stayed behind. He worked through the nights under blackout lamps, scavenging spare parts from wrecked planes, piecing together a working engine from 3 ruined ones. The plane that emerged from the shadows of that frozen hangar wasn't standard issue. It was an outlaw machine, built from fragments of war, unapproved and unrecorded. By Luftwaffe law, flying an unregistered aircraft was a serious offense, punishable by court-martial or even death. But Schulze no longer cared. His squadron was gone. His friends were dead. And across the frozen border, Soviet columns were advancing toward East Prussia, slaughtering anything that resisted. He had no orders left to follow, only one purpose. The lone plane, patched with mismatched panels and marked only with a hastily painted black cross, took off into the cold dawn of January 1945. It wasn't a sanctioned mission. It wasn't even part of a unit. It was one man against an army, an outlawed pilot flying an illegal plane into a sky that no longer belonged to him.